right, great day, Gadfly subscribers. It's Carlos. I hope everyone's having a great day today. It is Tuesday, January the 12th, and also want to welcome our non-subscribers as well. This is a public live stream that we're doing. We're simulcasting. If you have not done so yet, please jump over and visit our site, thegadfly.vhx.tv, where you can learn about our subscription-based system that's there. Great contributors, London Paul, Jim Willie, Ken Shortkin Jr., We also have a couple of social media profiles that you can follow on us as well. We have the Twitter handle, which is at the Gadfly MCN. We also have a Facebook page, which is at the Gadfly. And today I'm very excited to be joined by London Paul of the Series Report. Paul's one of our contributors and also has his platform, which is theseriesreport.com. Great articles as well as his premium content, which are his daily podcasts. So, Paul, great day. How are you, sir?
Yes, I'm very well. And yourself?
Interesting times indeed, Paul.
Yes.
And I think I've said that to kick off like the last several of our discussions.
The last several millennium.
It feels like it, and I'm sure these next 8 days will feel like an eternity as we navigate through it. But we'd been doing quite a bit of text messages just for the people that are tuning in. We don't. There's often communications behind the scenes as we're figuring out strategies and what we want to discuss and talk about. And so it's not like we don't want to, just put up content onto our site, but at the same time, we want to make sure to make it factual, as accurate as possible. And then more importantly, making sure that the listeners want to listen to it.
Well, also not trying to just be populist, not trying to, say things people want to hear. And I thought it was a good opportunity to make some observations of things that have gone on in recent years. And this is not about trying to say, see, we told you, because that's not the point. But there's a hugely significant point, I think, that's worth making. And this is something that existed. We have the mainstream media world, which everyone is very familiar with, and all the deficiencies and all the problems with that. And then we have the alt media world. And unfortunately, elements within the alt media world are just really doing what the mainstream media does. And what the mainstream media has done, and governments for that matter, and everyone else, is they like to put people into what I would term a state of very heightened emotion. Why? Because when people are in a state of heightened emotion, often they're not able to analyze things in a calm way. They're not able to understand and appreciate the significance of things. And in a heightened state of emotion, when they latch onto something, they're far more likely to keep hold of that and never deviate or waver from it, even when things are completely to the contrary. I mean, and we've seen this historically, and it's through propaganda. And we know propaganda exists with governments. We know it exists in the financial sector. We know it exists hugely in the mainstream media. And it's the way they convince people of whatever agenda they want to see. And if we go back in history, a great example of this was the Nazis in Germany. I mean, that was a massive propaganda campaign. It drove people into states of really heightened emotion, almost hysteria, to drive people in a certain direction. And it wasn't till the war ended. And then a lot of German people came down off this, and they were like, what the hell were we believing in this for? What the heck happened? But it's a very, very powerful way of driving people to believe in things that ordinarily, if they sat there for 5-10 minutes and thought about it, they would never agree with it. And unfortunately, hence why they convince people that Syria is committing chemical weapons attacks and they're killing children. Why do they say that? Puts people in a heightened state of emotion. They don't think of the rationality of what's being said to them. So their reaction is, this is appalling. Because in reality, if that happened, it would be appalling and far stronger language. And they buy into it and go, right, launch missile strike. So that vindicates Western nations to do these actions and on the basis of nothing. Whereas if people sat there and went, hang on a minute, is this a reality? Did this actually even happen? But they rely on the fact that huge amounts of people are just driven instantly into this heightened state of emotion. And you know, this will be a very unpopular thing to say with some people, given the rhetoric, but 3 years ago, I said this is exactly what would happen with China. And lo and behold, we're 3 years later, this is precisely where we are, which is why they say all these horrendous things are happening in Xinjiang. Why? Again, drives people to a heightened state of emotion, because if it was happening in reality, people would be furious, livid, angry, and all manner of emotion. But it's a way to drive people into this heightened state of emotion, so they're angry. And then after that point, whatever you say to them about China, they go, oh, well, it must be true. And then if anything that is actually a reality, or China says something, well, it's a lie. So it's conditioning people. And as you say, whereas if people look at things objectively, they'd go, well, is this reality? Is this actually happening? Is this, and it's always this heightened state of emotion is when they want to drive an agenda. And typically, it can be a very negative agenda. It's not a positive agenda. But then we come to the alt media. And we said for a long time that Q amounted to absolutely nothing. And I know people still think with 8 days to go to the inauguration that there's all these magical plans happening. Well, there isn't. And here's the big, big problem with this, because it far transcends the whole notion of the Q movement. Again, it drove people into a heightened state of emotion because it got a lot of people who were disenfranchised. Rightly, no one's saying, you know, people should be happy with the way the United States operates or the world operates, but it drove them into a heightened state of emotion. It made them have something to really believe in, hang on to, feel this was all going to happen, and America was going to be transformed, the world was going to be transformed. Trump was going to solve all the problems. There was this masterful plan. And again, you drive people into this heightened sense of emotion. Whereas people in a calm frame of mind would have looked at this, as they should have, and gone, hang on a minute. So you're telling me that there's this omnipotent, all-powerful cabal deep state that exists in the United States, and somehow it's going to be defeated with a plan that is playing out on a message board. Now, you only have to think for 30 seconds on that to realize that was never a reality. But here we are 3+ years later, and there's still people desperately hanging on to the belief that these things are happening. And therefore, we get situations where facts get twisted. Like currently, yes, there's a big, I think it's the National Guard in Washington. There's obviously a presence on the streets, and that's being twisted. That this is when the military returns the United States to being the republic, or restores order, or whatever they want to believe. No, they're there because they think there's going to be trouble associated with the inauguration of Biden and leading up to that. That's why they're there. All the stories that Trump's in Texas because there's all these plans going on. No, Trump's going to Texas to look at the wall between Mexico and the US, obviously. So again, there's that distortion of facts for whatever reason. And then we come to the worst aspect of this, is because people didn't look at this Q movement and go, well, it's going to be enormous, and didn't think for 1 minute, well, maybe it's been infiltrated by law enforcement, by intelligence agencies. Maybe intelligence agencies were the ones putting all these posts out. We don't know, we can't say, but a narrative was crafted, and what do we see? It attracted enormous audiences. I mean, I don't know in the end how many people were into this, but we're probably talking millions globally. It was that big. Well, the question they didn't ask themselves is, well, if there was infiltration, was the disinformation put out in various ways to see who would say it, where it would go, who was looking at it, who was then imparting it, because that's a classic kind of counterintelligence operation to see where this information is going, who's saying it, why they're saying it, how is it being presented. Fast forward to January 2021, okay, we already discussed the very, and this is just a very blunt statement, the very peculiar developments in terms of the people who obviously breached the Capitol building. Then we know there's, these new terrorism laws coming in, which isn't clear yet what they are, but probably undoubtedly they were written some time ago. So there's a precedent. The media is trying to focus on the whole Q movement. What happens when if they designate the Q movement as a terrorist group? Is that possible? Yes. And then they have all the information. They know all the main people, and not even the main people in this movement. Is there a risk they'll act on that? Possibly. And this is what I mean. People get sucked into something and actually don't realize, as a consequence of this, that they then may be potentially putting themselves in some peril because of following this, making statements. Not that I'm comparing all this to Julian Assange, but it's very easy to distort the perception of what people are saying, and people can very honestly say things and it can be twisted and distorted. And this is a huge problem. And this is why people need to be extremely careful in diving in at the deep end and believing something just because it satisfies some aspect of their fear or it offers a solution. This time it was a very positive thing to try and convince people was a reality. And then we need to start saying, okay, well, what other aspects of the alt media are giving us ideas about things, are presenting things? Is this driving us into a state of heightened fear? Now, that doesn't mean everyone who's saying it is doing it for that reason. They may be doing it because they were in a state of heightened fear, and they're then putting it out there because they believe it to be true. So we can't accuse everybody of being the root cause of the problem, because they're not. But the problem is we need to start to be far more circumspect. We need to have far better discernment in how we look at what's coming out of the alt media. We know all the flaws and problems of the mainstream media, absolutely. But to have this idea that the alt media doesn't have that problem is not true. And the alt media has been infiltrated by the intelligence agencies, by law enforcement, by those who wish to present a certain idea because they want to provoke a response, or they just simply want to see how the alt media works. How does information get disseminated? Because to them it's a potential problem. So therefore, going forward, we need to start to say, okay, if these ideas are being presented, is this logical? Is this a reality? Is this something that is actually playing out, or is it what I hope plays out, or what I perceive to be playing out? And we need far better discernment, because essentially a lot of people have spent huge amounts of time, huge amounts of energy investing in something that wasn't a reality. And despite repeatedly being promised this is going to happen now, never happened. No, it's manana, next week, next month, after the midterms. Oh, he'll be in Trump's second term. Well, here we are. No Trump second term. So, we need to start to think more, because the problem is when push comes to pull and Biden's inaugurated, what are these people going to do then? Some of them are going to be crushed by this because they've invested that much time, because the heightened state of emotion at some point is going to get a jolt. And when it does, what's the effect going to have on these people? So we were very clear. We've made it very clear for all this time there was no reality to this. We explained why. And people got very angry. I still get people getting in touch now who are literally saying, I'm furious because you were actually right, but I'm still furious with you. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, we're not the problem. You need to be angry with the fact that whoever's convinced you to believe in this. And it's nothing to do with us. You can't fault us for pointing out the truth about things. But that's what heightened state of emotion does. When you stay in a position where you're calm and you think about things, you analyze things, you would never get sucked into this. Yes, there are some people who got sucked in and then rapidly left it, realizing it to be what it is. But this is an important precedent. And that's why I'm not blowing our trumpet, but we deal with facts. I do it on my own Serious Report. We do it with the Gadfly, where we deal with facts. We only deal with the reality of things. The reality is not always popular. It's not exciting. It's not like a roller coaster ride. It's not, intrigue. It's just dealing with facts. Because at the end of the day, more than ever, given at this point in a very turbulent period in our history, we need facts. We need to understand reality. So if I talk about a whole bunch of things with regards to China, it's because that's what China's doing. It's not about I'm waving a red flag saying this is the future. This is what China's doing. It's a reality. And for 4 years, I've kept saying all these things. They're all happening all the time. That doesn't mean we're supportive of anything. We're here to be neutral. We're here to sit in the middle. We're not partisan. We're there to critically appraise what's going on. And it's like the Biden administration. We're going to be on them like a ton of bricks. If they're doing the wrong things, we're going to say it. If they do something that's positive, we'll say so. Because we have to convey the picture of what's happening and not what people want to believe, or we're skewing our perspective to one side, because if we do that, we'll have many, many, many more subscribers, or lots more followers if we had a YouTube channel, or whatever it is, or tens of thousands of Twitter followers. Although increasingly, of course, with Twitter, it's becoming a law of diminishing returns with people, but you get the point. This is a very critical juncture where once Biden's elected, hopefully this is going to make people in future look at things differently. And try to remember the people who advised you in a positive way not to get sucked into that world, and also maybe to go back and question the people who kept telling them things and saying, why did you tell me this? Why did you have that impression? What was the reasoning for you to do this? Instead of getting angry with us for stating what only has turned out to be true. Because at the end of the day, if people had followed what we'd said, they would have saved themselves 3+ years because it's an enormous amount of energy to invest in something that significant to believe it's going to happen. And then when it doesn't, that's going to be extremely difficult for people to adjust to. But people's choice, do what you want, but try not put yourself in that position. So going forward, when there's ideas, these things are going to happen, or something's going to happen. Who's saying it? What's their track record for saying this? Yeah, are they correct, or are they always wrong? And also, is this actually a reality? Is it something that really, when we think about it, is going to happen? And if the answer's no, then we need to walk away from it, because information's one thing, but getting the right information and the right perspective and understanding, and it doesn't mean we're always right. I'm not saying that, but we're honest in our appraisal. We're very straightforward. We state things that are factual. If we have an opinion or a theory, we'll say this is an opinion or theory. Because equally, I don't want people hanging off what we're saying, going, well, therefore that must be factually true. Because it all comes down to responsibility. And I think, and I'm not saying we're unique as a platform or what I do individually, but we try to be responsible at all times and considered in what we say, because people do follow what we say. So therefore, I feel an intense need to be mindful of what I say and the ramifications of it, because that's being responsible.
Yeah, very well said, Paul. Just give a little bit of behind the scenes information. Everyone knows that, probably very familiar with my my work also over at Rogue, and this dates back several years. And I was one of the early, whenever the information came forward, and there was this, I believe at the time it was a 4chan board, and some of the information that was being posted, and I had a former colleague send me this and said, hey, take a look at this and share what your perspectives are. And so I started reading through, and like, well, it's interesting for sure. There's some things that potentially could be factual, and some things that align that seem correct at the time. Now, mind you, this was several years ago. So I also bounced that and sent that to W, the intelligence insider, who now goes by Juan07, and very familiar with W's work. We go back several years. You can Google Hagman and Hagman, W, the intelligence insider, to see his work dates back to 2015, 2016. So a little bit of history there. And W's initial take was, hey, I don't think this is real. I think it's bogus. I'd probably stay away from it. And there were some more posts continued from there, and some things that were kind of timed into some of the actions that was taking place. He said, maybe we need to take another look at this. And long story short, I kind of stayed with the perspectives of a big question mark, reading through it. And you can go back and this is documented in previous conversations, when I finally decided that this was not correct. And it dates back to one of the very first inspirational, motivational videos that was created in regards to Trump and the movement, and where we go one, we all go. And it was shared, and it was retweeted by the president, by Donald Trump. And it had, well over millions of views and all that kind of stuff. So I just did a little bit of homework on that video. And when I went to YouTube to the video, again, this is documented. I can't tell you which episode it was. I started looking at the video where the site came from. And when you went to that particular YouTube channel, it was based in Europe. And what was very odd about it was, you're able to go to YouTube, and when you go to YouTube to an actual channel, you can go to subscriptions, and you can actually look and see what that channel subscribes to. So when I did that, Paul, it went to various, there was probably 5 or 6 channels that they were subscribed to that dealt with altered personalities, split personalities, psychological things with people having multitude. And I started watching those videos, and I'm like, whoa, this seems pretty far out. Maybe this is one person pretending to be 5 or 6 that has multiple different types of personalities. And I shared that on air and said, hey, listen, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense for this channel to produce this video, the administration to tweet this out. And it threw up a big red flag to me, back then. And then when we started learning about, predictive type programming that takes place in terms of some of the most recent conversations with Edward Snowden, and one of the things in his most recent interview with John Stossel, and I really encourage everyone to go watch the full interview, watch the entire thing. Some of it hashes out based upon the past, and John Stossel admits that he knew very little bit about Edward Snowden. But what's interesting, what Snowden has learned, since releasing that, is the fact that not only are the tech giants, the Twitters, the Facebook, utilizing the information that we input to then generate ads, to generate content specifically we do, they started taking another approach, and was that, how can we program people what to think? How can we influence their ability, what we want them to think? And so therefore they started really altering the algos and putting those into our social programming, into our feeds. And that may sound not really like earth shattering, because I'm sure everyone was kind of aware of it. So what I'm getting at is, at the same time that this was occurring, in terms of the QAnons and the movement, and it could have been a very significant disinformation campaign to keep people complacent, to keep people that things are happening behind the scenes. And what I continue to argue to this date is that when you look back at the past 3 years in terms of what was accomplished, everything that they state that was accomplished was always, behind the scenes. There was never really anything on the surface. And I get why people followed it. I like most people like a great, movie that's a thriller that, keeps you in suspense and everything. So it's very easily to see psychologically why this happened. And then if we go back, we remember where the original, I can't remember if it was 4chan or 8chan, the original Q board was taken down. It was taken down. And I firmly believe that at that point, that if there were behind the scenes operatives that were doing stuff, that it was shut down, and then it was taken over and reemerged as something different. And that's where potentially it could have been used as a I don't want to use the word entrapment, but it could have been used as a database to really to identify and to use to what the current purge that just happened, where literally 70,000 plus Twitter handles were dropped because they were easily able to capture the people that were posting or retweeting or comment and say, listen, these potentially in the future. Now, I'm not excusing their behavior. I want to make sure that that's clear. I'm not excusing the behavior of the tech giants in this suppression. We have many people who are coming forward from both sides of the aisle saying, hey, look, this is not the correct thing to do in terms of stifling free speech, all these things that are being said. But if you think about it, Paul, it created a massive database to be able to identify the people who are disenfranchised with the government. And they leverage that database, and that's exactly what happened, Paul.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to also emphasize, and I said this on Twitter, that whether you agree with someone or disagree with them, then censoring them is not the way forward. I mean, yes, there's an argument for censoring people who incite violence or terrorism or things like that. That's a different matter. But no, there was actually censoring them is completely wrong. But you make the point quite validly, and this feeds into what I said that there's obviously for some considerable period of time there was a database being collated because you couldn't, in a relative blink of the eye, just suddenly take down all these accounts, tens of thousands of them, associated with one common theme. That proves there'd been some sort of understanding, and that obviously accounts have been monitored for some considerable period of time. I mean, if you just randomly took people down, that's different, because I mean, they could just wipe a whole bunch of people out randomly very easily. But this was targeted and coordinated, which exactly proves the point I made, that probably for quite some considerable period of time, there has been a huge amount of interest. So people who invest their time and energy into these things need to understand as well that at some point, if this all gets twisted on its head, and I don't doubt this Capitol building incident is now probably going to almost certainly be a catalyst for new anti-terror laws or new terrorism regulations. And people need to read those closely, because they may decide to designate things like that, for argument's sake. Or they may not reference it specifically, but they may say that people who are involved in this could be subversion and all kinds of things. And we're not saying that's the case, but it doesn't matter. The reality is this is what laws state, and people involved in these things, for all the right reasons from their perspective, might be being sucked into a world that's extremely damaging and also potentially extremely dangerous to you. I mean, there's one thing, quoting it, but people involved at a very significant level. There could be an argument that says in the future, well, these people have been subversive, these people have been X, Y, and Z, and an action could be maybe taken against them. We're not saying that is the case, but this is why it's critical that people, when things happen and they come about, they go, hang on. Right. And as I said, the first thing, when I first heard about, someone said to me, oh, there's this Q thing. And I went, what's this? And they went, blah, 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 blah. And it wasn't. And I went, okay, so the premise is there's this plan. And at some point, the plan's going to be rolled out. Now, bearing in mind, I'd heard all this on and off for 20, nigh on 20 years before that. So it wasn't exactly new to me. But my first instinct was, so even if this was a reality, and let's just assume for 1 minute it was, the last place you would hear anything mentioned of it would be on a message board, because why? If you had a plan, you wouldn't alert the people that you intended to deal with, or whatever you intended to do. You wouldn't give them warning that you were doing this, because you allow them the opportunity to take countermeasures. And the idea there's all these cryptic messages, so only Q followers can work out the cryptic messages and no one else can. I mean, bearing in mind you're supposed to be up against this omnipotent, all-powerful with massive amounts of resources who have the intelligence capability to crack anything, but apparently they can't work that out. And for me, that gets personal to me. I sat there and in 2 minutes I went, no, this is not, it's nonsense, because that would never happen. And the fact I'd heard it for years that all these things were going to happen, it's the military is going to take over and restore the republic. This is all old news. I've heard it so many times and it never happens. And the military would never get involved in that situation ever. Because when you suspend the constitution, then you open up a whole world of pain. And you really do not want to go there. Rather, like people going, we need a civil war. And I was like, would you actually know what that would mean in reality? No, the last thing America needs is civil war. What America and Britain needs is people peacefully to ditch all the things that have been done to divide and conquer them. Okay, I'm repeating myself, but I think it's very important that we come together peacefully. And people start to say they're not happy and they won't accept things the way they are. And if they do it in a non-partisan way, and everybody from all different persuasions of whatever they may be, unify together, then change will happen. But until that happens, and this is why, politically, it's a great way to divide people, because and it's like we found, if you criticize Trump, then I got branded a communist, a Democrat, a Chinese shill, and all manner of things. Now, frankly, I don't care what people say, but it's indicative of just this emotive reaction. And, you make some criticism or you make some remark about something and people don't read things. They just immediately, their emotion makes them go, you said this, therefore you're that. And there's no that idea of, well, actually, what are they saying? Is it correct? And that doesn't mean, you either are 100% with Trump or 100% against him, or 100% with whoever, Biden or whatever the situation may be. The fact is, the world's changing, and the United States is not a dominant empire. It's not a hegemon anymore. It's not going to have the US dollar as the world reserve currency. Its days are over, and there's a big shift in the world. And we've focused a lot on this big shift in the world and what this means, what's happening, how the whole thing's unfolding, because that's what's happening. This doesn't, and therefore, it's our duty for what we do in the series report to put that information out as accurately as possible, and our track record of being accurate is why we have people who've subscribed from day one and continue to subscribe with us. And we have huge amounts of very long-term subscribers and that's the point we want to do the Gadfly, is to keep retaining people because they see the value.
Paul just dropped for just 1 minute. I'm sure he'll be back. It appears his browser was closed, or maybe his internet went out. So Paul is correct. I mean, if you look back in the conversations that we've had, at the Gadfly with our multi-channel network, we have been documenting and talking about the transition and the economic reset that's occurring, and that's why we talk a lot about the geopolitics, the economics of all these things that have transpired, and understanding we are moving more to a multipolar world that's evolving rather quickly. The other thing I want to talk about is that we, with our Gadfly and our multi-channel network, we don't specifically line up and dictate to each contributor in terms of what to talk about. And I know sometimes that's challenging because we do get people that are, for example, Jim Willie and his commentary may be different from Paul's and Ken's and mine in general, as I'm starting to comment a little bit more as it relates to a multi-channel platform. And I think it is important to take on different perspectives. And I encourage everyone, not to get stuck into, one paradigm, one thought, because at the end of the day, there is a lot of analysis, a lot of assessment to what's happening in the world. But there's also that uncertainty, and that variable has to be clear when we are saying those things. So So again, what Jim comments on, I don't specifically, tell Jim, hey, Jim, you can't do this. You can't say this. And we would not do that. What's the purpose of having the site? And in part for our subscribers and everything else, I encourage you to take a look through different, the different channels that we have. And, that's why it's called a multi-channel network. And several, companies are trying to go about this attempt and bringing, several contributors together and share different ideas, different perspectives as it relates to the world that we're living. But there's no doubt it's the most interesting times indeed that we're evolving through. And again, just getting back to the idea in regards to the censorship that's occurring, and even Steve Forbes has moved forward and said, look, I think the censorship is a big mistake, to shut down and the double standard that's applied. If we think back to the summer and some of the organizations that took place and leveraged some of the social media platforms, they didn't have a problem with it back then, but now they do. And in the interim, like I said, I think it's important to understand that the suppression of ideas, the suppression of free speech is very dangerous to our republic. And, my gosh, it's an odd day when you hear, people like Angela Merkel and Macron come forward to defend Trump and say, hey, look, and even the president of Mexico to say to remove Trump and completely deplatform. Think about that. You're talking about a sitting U.S. president and removing him and his ability to communicate with the American people. And it's just very, very interesting times indeed as we navigate through this monumental shift. I do want to thank you, those that are tuning in. Also for our Gadfly subscribers, thank you for supporting our multi-channel network. Again, if you're listening to this for the very first time in regards to the Gadfly, you can visit our site, which is thegadfly.vhx.tv. You can actually start a 30-day free trial, listen to our content, or go through the different playlists. There's tons of content that's there. If you like it, great, $10 a month, or you can save yourself a little bit of money and subscribe for $100 a year to our multi-channel network. And again, also our social handles, you can follow us over at the Gadfly MCN, or we do have a Facebook page, and we don't post nearly as much as we in terms of different articles and so forth, but more so that you can see our content, and we do occasionally do public live streams similar to the one that we're doing today. So I appreciate everyone listening in, and apologize that Paul dropped off, and we will do this again real soon. I believe that Ken Shotgun Jr. and Paul have a scheduled discussion for tomorrow, and I'll probably be doing something with Jim Willie the next day or two. Take care, everyone. Be safe, and God bless.